Welcome to the Film Riot podcast. I'm Ryan Conley, and today on the show we have Dayna Lynne North, who is an amazing executive producer, showrunner, and writer. She's worked on things like Veronica Mars, and recently with HBO's Insecure, she was executive producer and a writer on that. So we dive into a lot of how she sees story, what the role of an executive producer is, how she gets into a story when she's breaking it at first. She's extremely knowledgeable and incredibly talented and very open and honest with all of that knowledge. So it's a really great episode that we have for you today. But before we get into that, I did want to thank our sponsor, which is MusicBed, which I've talked about MusicBed a ton. If you need music for your project, which you always need music for your project, whether you do event work, short films, documentaries, whatever it is, you need really good music. And often we're moving so fast, it's a little bit difficult to be able to, go out and find it the way you normally would or craft original music from scratch. So MusicBed takes all the difficulty out of that. They have really great quality. They make it very simple to find what you need for your project, so you're not being slowed down by that part of the whole thing, because we all know how difficult it is to find the right music. Plus, they're connected with YouTube, so everything gets cleared very easily, and they have different subscription levels depending on your needs. So definitely jump over to filmriot.com/podcast. Click the link there to learn more about MusicBed. But now I'm going to shut up and get right into it with Dayna. One of the things I'm most excited to talk to you about is really just diving into writing. But before we get to that, I kind of just wanted to hear about how you got your start. What was your first into the industry? What made you want to do this to begin with?
I mean, since I was a kid, I was always one of those kids that was into the behind the scenes things. Like, I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. I was a theater kid. I actually did professional theater when I was really young. And I was always into poetry. I was always into stories. My dad was my first writing mentor, in that he used to make up my bedtime stories. And I didn't realize that was a big deal until I got older. But he almost never, I can't really ever remember my dad reading a book to me. He was a big reader. We were both big readers, but he always loved to make up my bedtime stories from scratch.
That's
and
amazing.
I didn't realize, right, what a big deal it was. But he'd get the plot twist and everything in there, and he'd come running home late, trying to get there before I was going to bed. And I'd be like, okay, so we were in the cave, and then the girl was this, and that, I was reminding him where we left off. He's like, right.
So it was like continuations. It wasn't like a new story every night.
Totally.
He was like building on it.
Exactly. He was teaching me I had no idea, teaching me about plot turns and cliffhangers and all this stuff, when I was really little. Yeah, right.
I'm going to steal that. I'm going to start doing that with my daughter. That's great.
You should please do, isn't it? It's a really beautiful thing. And yeah, it's really fun. It's such a great organic way to, first of all, to just have fun. And it's a different kind of, I was so fascinated. First of all, you'll be on a whole other level of superhero dad, because you're literally, you're the storyteller, you're performing. You're not reading a book is one thing, that's one type of bonding, but you're literally the storyteller that she's totally engaged with,
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you remember how old you were when he really started doing that with you?
I don't. I mean, I don't. I just know that I was old enough to, I'm going to say probably by, 5, 6, 7, it was young. It was early elementary school for sure. And it was when I was young enough that I still wanted a bedtime story, you know, and then, but I do remember understanding, again, I remember asking about what was going to happen next, and tell me, we got to finish the story. And they would, by the way, it would be a story might be 2 or 3 bedtime sessions type thing. But yeah, he definitely did shout out to him for teaching me again about cliffhangers and plot twists. He was the first one. But coming back to your question, then I got into, I always was a kid who, before I knew there was such a thing as film school, I was enamored with watching the making of Star Wars, or the making of anything anytime when HBO started doing, when I would catch those behind the scenes featurettes.
Yeah.
I was enamored as a kid. I was always really enamored and intrigued with those. And then there was also the storytelling side of just writing poetry, being in plays. So it's always been a part. I'm one of those people that's, from the time I was really young, I wasn't running around with a camera, but I just was a storyteller, Yeah. And so, in different ways. And so then I did find out, by the time I was in high school, I was doing journalism. I was writing for school newspaper and doing different things and not a school newspaper, but a local teen newspaper that got distributed throughout the city. That was kind of cool. So I was writing in a bunch of different ways, and then found out there was a film school. Got started to get more educated about the fact that I could really go study film and TV, and was excited to do that. And so then came out to LA and went to USC, and mostly never looked back. So it's been fun. No, it has. It's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And what was your first industry job?
Good question. Let me think.
Or the first significant, the thing that really got like the ball turning for you.
Yes, that's what I was trying to think about. Yeah, I would say it was. And that was interesting too, because when after I went to USC, which the best part of that experience was the friendships. Like it was I had fun, you get to learn, you get to run around with the camera for the first time, but it connects to your question because my friends, the friends that I made in college I still work with them. We still hire each other. And so my first job was, one of my friends from college was assisting the EPs of a TV show. And she knew that NBC, and she knew that they were probably going to need a writer's assistant. And so I met like the woman who would end up being my mentor for a while and hiring me on my first show that I wrote for was called Any Day Now. It was created by Nancy Miller. And Nancy and I met when I worked briefly for her on the show Profiler. And I was a writer's assistant on that show. And it was really fun. It was my first, and I came out of school thinking, I want to write and direct films. And it was back in that whole kind of ridiculous era when people still had films on a pedestal that was like an unnecessary pedestal. I still have a great romance and love with cinema, but the idea that it's superior storytelling to TV.
Right.
I think people were still under that illusion back then, including me. And so I was thinking I was going to go work in film, but then my friend gave me a referral to meet with the EP and showrunner, one of the showrunners and the head writer for Profiler. So I met with her. She was like, what do you know about Final Draft or whichever program we were using at the time? And what do you know about this? I was like, I've never done this job, but I would love to do this job. I think it'd be really fun. I'm a fast learner, and we kind of connected and she hired me, which I was very fortunate about because I don't think I really knew how nearly impossible writer's assistant jobs are to get. And so I also was just very fortunate again that I had a friend, who was there and referred me. So my first job was being a writer's assistant in television, which really put me on that path. And I did that job a couple of times and then was, promoted up to being a writer from that position, which I still think is one of the best ways to have that happen.
And for those who don't know, I mean, myself included, what does a writer's assistant do? What does that job entail entirely?
It's a little, so it varies somewhat from between drama and comedy, but in general, what they're doing is they're in the room. I think of it as almost like a masterclass or like getting to go to graduate, school while working, because you are basically sitting in the room with the writers and you're taking notes on the process, on the story breaking process. So if you're, whatever the show might be, right? If you've got 10 episodes to break of a show and you start off like, usually you start off very big picture, very blue sky with like, what do we want this season of X show to feel like, like what's happening, who's living, who's dying, who's getting together and breaking up, you start trying to figure out, right, all the big stuff. And so you start with blank whiteboards and lots of thoughts and usually, no bad idea. At that point, there's no bad ideas because we can go in a lot of different directions, even though you have some kind of parameters. If it's like a Veronica Mars, let's say, you have parameters of what the world is and all that and what the pilot was. And then from there, you're like, okay, but how do we want to move through this season? So a writer's assistant is taking notes on every day when you're in the room. They're taking notes on that whole process. And sometimes in the beginning, it is literally just a Word document just full of pages of notes trying to capture the nuggets of all the different brainstorms that are being thrown around. But eventually, as you start to hone in on the process of like, okay, now we've kind of figured out how we want this season to feel. We kind of know what the overarching case is and the big thing that might carry us through the season. We kind of know what that is. So we need to break that out. Then we want to start thinking about what are the episode to episode cases that Veronica might be taking on. We want to figure that out. What's the arc between her and the two in the sort of love triangle she's in? We got to figure that out. So as you start trying to do all those things, then you start breaking out, kind of mini outlines and arcing things, and the assistant's taking notes on that entire process. So you basically get a window seat where you are taking notes. And in most rooms, writers' assistants are able to pitch on occasion. Like it is important to like remember to truly like play your position and remember that you are the writer's assistant. So, but if you have a thought, or if again, most rooms, and I believe in this too, most writers' rooms, the assistant is able to throw something in if they have a thought. And the key thing about that is it also teaches you, when you are an assistant, it's like, if you're going to speak, you better have something worth saying. And it's not even to say that your idea has to be gold and that it has to absolutely make it into the story or the script, but just have it be something interesting, have it be funny, have it move the process forward. If people are stuck, then let your idea help, contribute to the unstuckness. And so for me, it really taught me, it's the best way to learn the value of like, how do you want to contribute? You get to see all the different ways people contribute to the process, how the different writer personality types. And then you get a chance to be really thoughtful about how you want to contribute. And you get to learn the nuts and bolts of how television is made.
Man, that's great. And there was a lot that you just said in there that was very fascinating to me. I really don't know how writers' rooms work, or I've never worked on series or anything like that. So all of that is incredibly fascinating to me. And one thing I'm really interested in is, you mentioned, you're thinking about what happened in the pilot. So does the pilot come first and you wait to see if that's going to then be picked up to then build out the season? Is that how that works?
Correct.
Okay.
That is exactly how that works. Yeah.
Interesting.
You got it. So yeah. So normally, I'll just say the majority of the time, yes. Like, whoever created the show has written a pilot, then whoever is, distributing the show, whether it be it whatever, HBO, NBC, Apple, Amazon, whomever, right? That you do a pilot. They figure out how they feel about that pilot. They shoot the pilot. They see it. They go, we like this. We're going to order, 8, 10, 12. These days, it's rare that people order. The network, sometimes if they're going to order 20 episodes, it's usually like 10, right? 10 in the fall, 10 in the spring, that kind of thing. So yes. So once they decide based off of this pilot, which is literally that, it's literally the foundation of the series, we're ordering this show. So then yes, when the staff comes on board, which is after that decision's been made, then they give you, it's like, okay, great. We're ordering a series. Here's your budget. Go hire writers, go get a producer who's going to help you, get like a line producer, right? Kind of like you're a COO of a television show is basically. So go get that person who's going to help you keep everything on track financially, and go hire writers and go do this and Godspeed. And so when that happens, yes, then your staff comes on and you have the pilot as your foundation, and you start what I was just explaining, you start building all that out. And it's same thing happens every season. So the first season of the show, you start it from scratch, right? Because you're like, okay, we have this pilot, and now where do we want to go based on what this pilot has laid out? And then every season you kind of come back and do the same thing, right? Depending on the show. And the shows that I tend to work on are character-driven shows. So very often you will have some sort of end of season cliffhanger. If you're talking about like your Law and Orders and your CSIs and your super procedural shows, those shows don't necessarily, sometimes they will have a, end of season cliffhanger, but not always. And so it just kind of, they're not as, they're closed ended, right? Usually from episode to episode. And again, sometimes they will for sure do a bigger arc of something where these days it's gotten more popular for everybody to do that. So to have those cliffhangers and things that extend, like my dad was doing, that extend, right? That like kind of leave you wondering what's going to happen. So every season you kind of come back and start the same way, which is okay, based on now we've, whatever, we've got a season behind us. Now, where do we want to start here? We have to pick up this thing of like, whatever, who killed so-and-so, or where did so-and-so run off to, or whatever the cliffhanger might be. But then you've got to decide what's going on with these characters this season. How are they growing? How are they not growing, etc.
And when you're on your first season, when you're first selling a series, is that sort of the same way? You're making a pilot and you're using that as your pitch to, say HBO? Yeah.
I mean, you're creating, when you're first doing it, then, it's like, it's not unlike being in a quarantine, actually. So what I mean is, first, it's you at your computer screen or your pages, depending on which way you write. I kind of still do both a little bit. And you deciding, what do I want to say? Like, my friend and mentor, Nancy Miller, who hired me on the first thing, that I did on the first show that I wrote on, what she would always say when we would start an episode, it's like, what do you want to say with this? And so like with this episode, we know what this show is about, but meaning it's another way to really say what's the theme of this. But the nice thing about it is thinking about what's the theme, like what's important to you that you want to make the theme of this thing. So the first question, so yes, before you get to HBO and all that, you have to, the writer creator of a show, figure whether it's that you read an article or you're adapting a book, or it's just, which is all IP, it's called, if you got some piece of intellectual property that you're using as the inspiration, then that might be your source material. And maybe it has like certain themes built into it that you are connected to, or you are starting from scratch and you're deciding like, I want to make a show about X because it's important to me. I want to make a show about, I keep seeing the trailers that Amazon is running for Upload. I think that's Greg Daniels' newest show, for example.
Yeah.
And so, you decide like, I want to make the idea of somebody who discovers that they are dead and kind of trapped between the real world and the beyond has been done many times, just like every kind of story has been done many times. But it's the question of how do you want to do it? What do you want to say? What commentary do you want to make? And so like, it seems like, using where we currently are with technology and social media and all of that stuff, and letting all of that factor into the story of a guy who's kind of caught in between. So you figure out, okay, this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to say, and this is the world that I want it to be set in, the city, the character. So what kind of character do I want it to be? Is it somebody who was really naive, and the whole point of this journey is how it's waking him up, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what Greg wanted to say exactly.
Right.
I'm riffing, but you get what I'm saying. So you figure all that out, and then you either pitch it to whomever, an HBO, an Amazon, an NBC, blah, blah, blah. You pitch it to them and they say, we really like that idea. Go write a script of it. And the process continues forward from there. Or you write a script of it on your own and just, and because you want to like make sure the vision of it is really clear. And then you can then say to whomever, here's this script. Do you like it? So those are kind of the two ways those things usually go.
And when you have that, they want it, they order, say, 10 episodes, like you said, and you're in the room and you guys are cracking the season. Mm-hmm. Are you thinking of the season as a whole in sort of a structured way? Like when you're writing a feature, you have like the midpoint, the turn in Act 2, the turn in Act 3. Does the season as a whole have that? Like, do you look at like, episode 5 as a midpoint, or is it really more just about each individual episode?
Like I was saying, especially the kind of shows that I do, which are more character driven in that way. So they really are. And like you said, if you're breaking, like, on Insecure, if we're doing 8 episodes or we were doing 10 episodes, they're doing 10 episodes this season. If you do something like that, you really do it's a very character driven show, right? It's very much about where these women are in their lives and where the men in the show are in their lives and what those arcs are. And so, you do, you really do kind of look at it like, it does fall in a similar way to breaking out a movie and arcing out a movie as far as, but not, we don't use exactly the same language, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's a similar thing in terms of the first third of the season and the way you're kind of ramping up and setting things up. Right. And then you have a midpoint, and then you're going to have like right before your finale in the like episode or 2 before your finale, usually some big things are happening, so you kind of have that act 2 point. So, you know what I mean? It's a similar structure, especially again, in a character driven show that's got 8 or 10 episodes. It's storytelling structure is storytelling structure, right? At the end of the day. So in terms of like building to something, reaching some kind of climax, creating some kind of resolution, it's just sometimes you might extend it out and the series might end the season might end more in that sort of climactic moment where you haven't resolved everything and you're going to come back and see how things resolve, so we might stretch out. I would say Act 2 tends to get stretched out in the television landscape of it all, but most of the time a season will still have a very similar flow to to the way a feature would flow structurally.
What about each individual episode? Are you kind of structuring those the same way, just in that micro level?
No, that's different. And again, it's different. So I would say the same thing. Meaning, at the end of the day, you're still following that idea of like you set up something, it rises to a climax, there's complications, then you resolve it. But and particularly, there's two different ways to think about it. So again, let's say you have an hour-long show on a network where you might have something like How to Get Away with Murder, or some other kind of show might have 4 or 5 act breaks, right? Because you're breaking for commercial all those times. And so you're building to some kind of climax, some type of little mini cliffhanger each time you go to an act break. You want it to be something strong that people want to come back from the commercial for. So in that way, the individual episode has a very specific structure, but I would say it gets to be different than that's probably where the most variation is from like the structure of a 3-act movie. You know what I mean? Because you've got like, you might have you literally have like a teaser and you have like 6 acts that you're breaking up. So, I mean, if you put it together, you'll still recognize that, that overall arc, but you are having a lot of mini like escalations within there.
So then do you find it very different writing just an episode for something that's on network where it has all those commercials in there versus, writing something for HBO? Does it make a big difference having those breaks?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Very. Yeah. I mean, it's a different for me. And I mean, they are different. What I call them. First of all, an hour of television is very different than a half hour structurally. So that's one thing. That's very different. And just, there's just different skills you have to learn. It's kind of like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy where once you're a writer who has experience and has been doing this, it's kind of like if you've been swimming in a pool and now you're going to go swim in the ocean. It's not like it's, there are different things to navigate, right? So it's not like but it is different. So the half hour to 1 hour, those structures are different. And then yes, when you go from a network where you have app breaks to a streaming where you don't, that's also different. Just figuring out because you still want to do the similar thing. You always want to create a build, like you keep the same things, like I said, that apply to all stories, right? Which are basically keep tension alive, right? Like, you set up what's going on, create a build, keep tension alive in the various ways until you bring the story to a resolution. Like that's really, right? That is at its core, that storytelling, but there are different ways that you have to do it depending on 1 hour, half hour, network versus, cable or streaming, if you have commercials or don't. Like there are all little tweaks to the program, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And within those rooms writing these series, you've had different roles like EP, head writer, showrunner. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about those different roles? And, for instance, an EP on a series, what is your main role, in that function? Like, for instance, for, your fantastic show, Insecure, what is your role there as an executive producer?
So, and Insecure, I was there the first 3 seasons. I'm now officially Insecure alumni, which is kind of crazy because for me too, at the end of season 3, I decided to move on and focus on development and all that, which was, as you can imagine, a difficult decision with a show that's like so amazing and a group of people that are so amazing. Sure. So now I'm watching it as a fan, and that's also been fun. But to your question, the way that works there is you're basically supporting. So I was supporting Issa, the creator, and Prentice, her partner, her showrunning partner. Oh, by the way, Prentice Penny. Shout out to him. We went to college together. We go back. And so it goes back to that thing I was talking about of like, and I talk about this some in my online writing course, which is just like figuring out who your community is like a really big deal. So coming back to your question, what I would do as a showrunner and supporting Issa and Prentice is we would often split the room. So we might have like 11 writers on the staff, and often you can then split the room. You have enough writers to split the room and kind of, and have an A and B room and both be working on separate episodes at the same time. And so I might be overseeing one room and either Prentice or Issa, depending on who was available or who was like doing, maybe in post or maybe Issa shooting or, different things might be going on with the two of them. So one of them would be overseeing one room and I would often be overseeing the other room. And then we would break. So it comes back to that process I was talking about, which is essentially you kind of can start off, it's like a funnel, right? You can start off with like really being blue sky and telling personal stories that, especially on a show like Insecure, we very much were using our own life and messiness and dating stories and whatever else, as inspiration. So there's the world of just being able to talk and just kind of share and kind of know, okay, what do we think, figuring out what we think, again, what do we want this episode to be about? And then making our way and sort of slowly funneling ideas and conversation toward what are the beats of this story going to be? Like, what is Issa's journey? So then you break down, and this would be the same in any show, whoever your main characters are, right? Each of them needs to have their own story. So you kind of break down, this is Issa's story for the episode. This is Molly's story for the episode. This is Lawrence's story for the episode. So we would figure those out. Eventually, you're breaking and you're basically doing A and B and C, and it might vary, like who has the B, who has the C, et cetera. All that can shift, but you're basically breaking usually at least 3 storylines. And then sometimes you might have a runner, which is like a little mini thing, like on Insecure, there might be some runner about what Kelly is doing. If there's some guy she's, trying to date and what's going on with them, could be a runner. Like, so there might be something that, throughout the episode, you might have like 3 scenes dedicated to it that give you a beginning, middle, and end to that runner, for example.
And what is a runner exactly?
It's literally just the term for a mini arc. It just means a mini storyline. Like I said, it's like a 3 scene, versus being a full story that might have 10 or 12 story beats to it. A runner might have 3 or 4. Like it's just a mini story arc.
Okay. Gotcha.
So you might have, like an A, B, and C story and then a runner. So coming back to the question of what am I doing? I'm overseeing in the room that process of one of the main things that I'm doing as a showrunner is that process, kind of like shepherding in the writer's room. It's being the person who's helping us to slowly kind of go from, blue sky, big picture stories, all of that, to honing in and figuring out, okay, what are the beats? How do we want this to flow? Again, what's the beginning? What's the surprising turn in there? How do we resolve it for each storyline? So because somebody, if you have a room of 5 or 6 people, someone ultimately has to be the sort of shot caller of like, okay, I think that's working. I don't know if that works here. Someone's got to be that person that helps to decide, make those decisions. And so that's essentially what you're doing. And at the same time, encouraging people to generate story and, keeping everybody on track, keeping it motivated, keeping it, all of that stuff. So that's that. And then in that phase, in the writing phase, and then once we get to set, and that's one of the really fun things for me, it's always been fun about producing television, is getting to actually see the process all the way through and getting to, again, kind of be a shepherd of a story and a script from when you're just staring at a whiteboard trying to figure out what you want the story to be, all the way through to when you're on set, watching being shot, to when you're looking at the edit of that episode, et cetera. It's fun to go through all those phases with a story. So on set, I would then, when we're in pre-production and in production, another part of my job would be working with the director of the episode to go through the prep process with them, right? All of the, the prop meeting, the costume meeting, if we have visual effects or music and how we're incorporating those elements, all the different prep meetings that go into shooting the episode. And particularly if there's, sometimes there are different meetings that may or may not happen depending on, is this a special one? Are we going to Coachella? Are we simulating going to Coachella? So what I mean? So you're working with the director through prep and through production to just be there and to help maintain the overall voice of the show. Because in television, you have often a different director directing every episode. And so, that's another part of a writer producer's job, is just to be able to maintain the vision, to work with the actors also and helping make sure that they're clear on intentions of things in the script, et cetera.
And you have done features as well, right? You've written features also.
Yes, I've written, none that have yet been produced, but that is correct.
And are you writing with anybody when you're doing those, or are those like a single endeavor?
Actually kind of both. Like I have co-written the story of I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually really enjoy working with the same way that I enjoy the room process. It's fun, to work with people and have like kind of be in the trenches with other people when you're creating story. I enjoy working with a writing partner as well, even though I don't have like one official. I'm not part of a team, but I enjoy that process. So like in features, I've done a couple different things. I've done it where I've like co-written the story with somebody. So we've worked together to kind of, again, to break the story of the film and kind of figure out what we want it to be. But then I will be writing the script. So I've done that process. And I've done also the process of just beginning to end, from pitch through outline through script, just doing that whole process on my own. So most of the time, my feature work is usually a solo affair, but I have enjoyed the times when I've done some part of it as a team. I enjoy that too.
Yeah, it's so nice to not just be on an island by yourself. Have somebody who can throw you a lifeline every now and again and bounce things off of.
Exactly. I think that's part of why I have spent a lot of my career and still really enjoy. I mean, even though it's been cool and I'm really enjoying working more on the feature side now, which is I started to do that more in the past few years, and I'm enjoying it. But I can't imagine myself ever not working some in television, because I do. I just enjoy the whole process of being a writer producer in television, and doing it on the feature side is different. And, they each have their own things about them, right?
Sure. Yeah. And you were talking about breaking the story, and that's always something that's like, walking through the desert a little bit for me. It's always different for me. It's like, it's always nice when you have that idea that's been like marinating in your brain for years, and for me, I find the vehicle and then that makes it easier. But, recently there was like a concept that was, grabbed, and then it was having to break the story that didn't exist yet for just a concept, which was, I found so difficult. So I kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit about that. Like, how do you get started into writing that idea? And do you find it's different every time how you're getting into it? Like sometimes it's a concept, sometimes it's a theme, sometimes it's a character, or do you always find a certain thing that it starts with and then you're breaking the story off of that starting point?
Good question. I like that question. I would say it varies. Like because I do tend to take a somewhat of a character driven approach to my writing. So often, the majority-ish of the time, I guess I would say it does often start with like kind of the combo of like a character and a scenario is kind of often what comes to me. But like some type of character and a specific like either conflict or thing that person wants to accomplish or chat, kind of the character and their main source of like, the dragon they're trying to slay. And usually I do not actually mean, that's not normally my genre. So I don't really mean the dragon, right?
Right.
But in general, you know what I mean? But like in general, what tends to come to me are the kind of character I'll kind of have a sense of them and who they are and what their thing is and kind of what some of their damage is, for lack of a better phrase. And then also whatever that dragon is that they're trying to slay, what are they up against? What are they battling? What are they trying to achieve? That kind of stuff tends to that's usually what I hook into, that I connect with, and it's usually the way in which I want to, whatever it is that I want to say, it's often the reason I want to say it, or the way, and so, but sometimes trying to think if I've ever started in other ways. There have been times when I've, and for sure, number one, it's like if I read something or if I read an article, like I read an article about something that I just was like, that is a show. Like sometimes I'll read something and just get inspired, where I'll just go like, and part of the reason will just be that, again, I'll feel like the characters almost like start to pop out to me just when I read it. Like I just get immediate. It's part of it is it just has to really hit me. I'm very driven by like, I have to really feel passionate and dialed in to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so, I always make the joke because I feel like there are right. Like I'm not one of those people that can just be like, I'll do it for a check. I mean, I wish my life might be very different if I was, but it's just, I have to like have, I have to have that thing that's like, that I get dialed in about, in order for me to get excited. So sometimes for sure I might read a book or read an article and it will spark something in me. But often if it's just me, just something coming to me, yeah, it's usually the character and the scenario. And again, that whatever that dragon is they're trying to slay are the things that get me excited.
And then what would be your process after that? If you have the character, the scenario, the dragon, what's your process now? Are you just doing a lot of daydreaming until you get to a certain like checklist of things that you have to start writing? And then once you do start, typing or writing, whatever it is, what is that first? Do you do like a beat sheet or a treatment first, or what's your first way into actually starting to really develop this thing?
I do typically, yes, I typically will do a couple things. Like I do like to have a file that is just, and I don't remember this is not my original idea, is what I'm trying to say. And I can't remember where I first learned it or heard it. Like years ago, I think I was at a Writers Guild panel, and I remember some writers talking about this idea, and I really connected with it, which is having a bit of a playground file or a kitchen sink file, a file that is purely for my mind to be able to like be out on the grass and recess all the time, and just be able to go. And then somebody might say this to somebody, and then things don't have to be in any kind of order. They don't have to make any kind of, as long as I can just remember what it is that I'm referring to. So it might be random scene ideas, random bits of dialogue. I think random just whatever it is, right? So I have a file that can just where anything goes. And then, yes, I also do tend to start. It depends on how I think I'm going to do the thing. If it's a pitch, then I'll start working on the pitch pages. But typically you're still, even if it's just a pitch, I feel like it is a form of a treatment or an outline, because frankly, for me to be able to pitch something, you kind of you got to know where your story is going, right? You have to ultimately know all the things that we keep coming back to. You've got to know your beginning, middle, and end, and what your turns are and what's exciting about it and what the world is. So as I start yes, there's a file where I start trying to figure that out, and then a file where I just play. And it depends, I will say, if I'm going to start writing the thing, like if I'm starting on a script, then I will start a more detailed document, for like a treatment or an outline along with the playground file. But if I'm going to write a pitch, it will be a little more broad strokes, because it's finding that balance, like for me, of, how do I put it? It's like I like to stay in a world where I know I don't want to get too bogged down sometimes if I know I'm going to pitch something. So it's just the combo of figuring out what's the right way for me to go into something. And again, it depends on what I'm going to do. So if I'm going to write it, then yes, I'll start like an outline and a playground file. If I'm going to pitch it, I'll start a pitch pages document, which is, a looser form of an outline essentially, and a playground file.
Yeah. I love that playground file. That's great.
Yeah, right?
That is so smart. I am absolutely going to start doing that. I love that. It's just, it seems like it would be so freeing just to not have to, this might not even belong, but here's an idea. I love that.
Exactly. And and again, I do not take credit for originating it, but I think it's a brilliant idea. And for me too, it also helps me to not, many of us can tend to have that like procrastinating, avoiding. And a lot of people also around outlines, I will say, there are a lot of people who feel like, I hate outlining. I just want to start writing it. And that's what it does for me, is it allows me to feel like, okay, I can be writing the script over here if I want. Because I do think there's so much value in creating some type of framework for myself, some type of outline. And outlines can look like different things, and they can, but some type of building some kind of structure for the house I'm going to build, I think for me is important. But I like the playground file for me. It allows you to kind of do both things at the same time, because I have the same urge of like, and I've actually become more friends. Outlining and me have become better friends over the years. But I definitely used to feel that resistance to it, and used to feel like, it just felt like homework you didn't want to do for me. And right. And so that's what the playground file allows, or kitchen sink file, I call it different things. But it allows your mind to have that freedom of feeling like, and literally, by the way, most of the time, if I'm working on a script, especially, most of the stuff I put in the playground file usually ends up in the script eventually. It's just that I'm thinking of it, how It's like when if I'm outlining, I might be at the beginning and think about something for the end, and I want a place to put that, you know? And so, yeah, it's nice.
Once you have that outline, well, like before, okay, you're writing this thing. Let's say it's a feature and you're definitely writing it. What has to be done before you actually sit down with the script and just start digging in? Is that outline is that a really fleshed out outline, or is it a very loose, like, you know, this happens, this happens, this happens?
Well, of course, it's ideally it's a pretty fleshed out outline, and often depending on the situation, especially if I'm developing it with other people, it's kind of, you know, with producers, with whomever, if there's attachments of some sort, whether it's producer attachments, star attachments, whatever, then I'm often going to be, or studio, I'm going to be showing that outline to people. You know, there's a good chance. So it's also and even if you're not, I think it's important to, like, even if you're not going to be, I think it's helpful to think about writing it as if you were, you know, because otherwise, if it's too loose of an outline, then it doesn't really serve a purpose. And again, there are those people out there. I have friends who will, like, bang out a script in a week and not outline it. Now, sometimes it also, and I'm like, you know what? Again, Godspeed. It's not. I'm not capable of that.
So jealous.
I know. But now, and let me say this: they would be the first to say that they will then go back and rewrite it a lot. You know, so there's something to be said for, of course, just like the vomit draft for the sake of getting from beginning to end, right? Sure. And in some ways, you could even argue, and as I think about it, actually, that in some ways, I think that they kind of let that serve almost as their outline, because they, like, vomit out a script that is not yet ready to be, you know, seen by anyone. And then as they go back through and rewrite that, that's really what they've created a foundation for themselves, right? And then they are going back and building on it. So
it's almost like their outline in a way.
Exactly. So, but for me, I can't, I will get stuck. Like if some people are the type who can do that and again, like, kind of vomit out a script like that, I know I would not want to go into a feature like that, because for me, it would very much feel like wandering into you know, a very deep, dark wood with no light, is how it would feel. Yeah. And so I would, you know, where I would feel like, okay, I can see like my first third of the way in, and then it's just going to get really murky. And so, so yeah, I feel like I think it's helpful to have a fairly detailed outline and sense of what you're building on, of where the turns are and what the story, because, you know, most features, you need a story that moves. And I think for me, it is definitely harder to make sure I have that if I haven't figured out the story first.
And what about structure? Is there any kind of specific structure that you're consciously thinking about when you're building this thing out? You know, like some people just think in a flat 3, some in 5 and a 6, and, you know, there's different schools of thought, and, you know, it's just, I think it's just, you know, whatever helps you through it. But are you consciously thinking of something like that? And if so, what do you lean more toward?
In general, I am. Again, if we're talking about a feature, because as I was explaining, TV, you know, can be broken up different ways depending on what you're doing. But for a feature, yes, I am generally thinking about the 3-act structure for the most part, unless there's some reason that I'm, like, doing something very specific for this feature that is a very clear breaking of, or, you know, very clear, like, variance from the traditional structure. But usually I'm thinking broadly about that. But I want to hear more about what you were saying. You said something about 5 and 6 something. I'm like, are you talking about acts, or what were you talking about?
Yeah, you know, like you have 3 acts, or, you know, some people thinking like, what is the Save the Cat? It's like a 5-act thing or something like that, right?
It's like the Cat thing. Yeah.
I find it useful to think in like 6, because it just gives me mile markers to make my way through it. You know, I find myself like that. Yeah. What I was saying, like that walking through this endless desert, where I feel like if I give myself like points to hit, like, you know, by this point, almost thinking of them in all these little short films almost in a way, but, you know, obviously not. Yeah. It just helps me get through it. And then once I'm through my first draft of it, then the thought process of that completely falls away. And then it's just about what makes it work. So I'm always just curious to hear, you know, for people like yourself, who's so experienced and just fantastic work, if there is a form of that you're thinking of, or if it's more, you know, instinctual.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Now I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I do kind of, when I'm outlining, I do kind of think about that, but it's a fine line, because I also feel like I try to kind of let the story again, I try to like really figure out what the story is and what I want it to be. And I try to look at that stuff, yes, when I'm outlining. And I do know what you mean as far as like, I don't consciously fully do the 6-act and save the cat thing. Like, but I do, you're right that I do try to like look at, just approximately, what do I, by page 15-ish, what do I want to have accomplished this turn in the story. By this, by page 30, I want to accomplish this turn approximately. I do think about that for sure as I'm looking at it, like just again, but to me, it kind of just comes back to the natural building. Like, the Save the Cat structure essentially like gave, how would I put it? It broke things down in a way that's very digestible and very now popular, but it's really just the basics of thinking about as how you want to build, right? How you want to build tension and keep that tension there and keep building it and twisting it and all of that. And so I do think about it like that, but not in the like super, I don't know how to put it, just not in a like super labeled kind of way in that sense.
You're not like religious about it. It's just the thing in the back of your mind pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. But I am aware, for sure, I am aware of like the things that I want to approximately hit. But because it is, I mean, it's really also just breaking down, if you're talking about, again, about a traditional studio film, most of the time you want to kind of fall within those parameters. But again, it depends on what I'm doing and what it is. It's like if you're trying to do your version of a Pulp Fiction or whatever it might be, and you're playing with structure and, so some of it just depends on that. And I do think it's a fine line because we've been telling stories the same way structurally for so long. So I also just think there's really something to be said for like being aware, of course, like it's important to know the rules, but not be overly, like whatever the word would be. I can't think of the word I want. Like when you're kind of, caged by them,
Right. Yeah, totally. Like know them so you can break them sort of a thing.
Yeah. It does come down to that. And also, but not, and also just like know them and don't feel like you have to like hit the mark. Even if you're not breaking them completely, you don't feel like you've got to like hit the mark exactly for something to work.
Yeah,
I guess is also what I'm
totally
trying to say.
agree with that. Like it's a little crazy to me that it's like on page 25, you absolutely have, that's like, come on, it can't be page 26. Like that seems kind of crazy to me. Yeah. What about theme? When are you finding your theme for a story? Again, let's just saying feature, since it is more of a singular condensed thing, easier to talk about. Are you finding your theme up front right away all the time? Or do you find, after you've built something out that because I know a lot of writers, myself included, often it's like, I built out a thing and then I didn't even realize that, this theme was being poured into it subconsciously. And then I start finding it and pulling it out of that. Do you find more that way, or are you consciously from the get-go really infusing that?
Well, again, it comes from, I do like to think about it. And again, coming back to the what do I want to say piece. So for me, usually the reason that if I'm doing something, whether it's something that I have been, whether it's something that someone's brought me in and said, hey, we have an open writing assignment on this project. Would you be interested? Whether it's a version like that, or whether it's me coming up with something from scratch, like whichever way, if I'm going to be writing something, it's because if I'm going to take on a project, I've got to have something that I want to say. And for me, that's where the theme would come in. So that whole process of like figuring out who are these characters? What is the quote unquote dragon they're trying to slay? Like, what's this world? What are people trying to accomplish? What are the challenges to what they're to what our protagonist is trying to accomplish, blah, blah, blah. Within the why do I want to tell this story, which I, again, think is important. And that's part of why I decided to even do an online writing course, was kind of realizing, these are the things that kind of make up voice and a writer's voice. Like, I kind of think the theme should be like why you're telling something in the first place. Yeah. But I agree with you for sure that you absolutely can end up finding, like, once you start writing and when you get to the end of a script and you kind of see, like, you can absolutely have more than one theme. I think most things have if they're well written, have a primary theme, and then you can absolutely have secondary things that are like being commented on, right? You might have some story that's about whatever the environment, but it's also got a theme about parenting, whatever that is. So yes, so it's like there's that's usually the way I think about it, is in the why do I want to tell this story? The theme should be in that answer, and then should be infused in that way. So yeah, usually I come up with it fairly, because I kind of feel like if if you're working on something and you don't know the theme, I feel like that's problematic. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. It's kind of like the guiding force to everything, really, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I really love just your outlook on story and character and how you approach it all, which leads me to want to talk a little bit about this masterclass that you have, which is out or it's coming out. It's called Right Away, right?
Yeah, it's called Right Away, and it's on Teachable. So if you look up, you can either just do Dayna Lynne North and Right Away, or if you look up Right Away and on Teachable is the platform. But yeah, and it's the sort of the theme of that is how to find and hone your unique writing voice. And it really kind of comes back to everything that we've been talking about in the broader sense. Like what I decided to do with the course is I wanted to kind of start for people who, wherever you are in terms of writing experience. So whether it's that you have something you want to talk about in a story that you want to express, and you don't know if you want to do, should I do a podcast? Should I do a one-person show? Should I write a TV script about this? Like, you're not even sure how you want to express the thing. It really is about like figuring out like what your voice is as a writer and how you want to say the things you want to say. So it comes back to what you were just asking around theme and all that. I decided to, because all of this is, as you can hopefully tell, it's stuff that I enjoy talking about. I enjoy being a mentor. It's something that I naturally end up doing when I'm on shows, like with the other writers' assistants, because since that's how I came up through the ranks. So I enjoy working with people who are sort of starting their writing journey and people who are early on in their journey and people who are figuring things out. It's helpful. I still for sure have mentors. It's always helpful to have people like that. So I wanted to do a class that sort of let you feel like I can be that to you as you're kind of starting the journey. And I say that because, like you just said, there are so many things out there like Save the Cat and this and that give you the whole, here's the structure of a feature. Yeah. Like that's not what the class is. The class speaks more to, because you can find that so many places and figure out, how and some of it depends on what you even want to write. And so the class is much more about how do you want to approach like finding your voice, infusing your voice into whatever it is that you're doing.
Oh, I love that so much. And I do a show called Film Riot, and it's for, more newbie filmmakers. So I have a nice pool of newer filmmakers or, people trying to break in that I talk to quite often. And that idea of what is my voice? How do I find my voice? How do I utilize that? What does it even mean? Is such a huge thing for people. So I am so excited that that's what it is around.
Thank you.
Because I don't know. I honestly can't think of another place that really focuses and dives into that. So I'm not gonna lie. Once we get off the phone, I'm gonna go get it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, please let me know. Drop me. I'll make sure you have my email and I'm easy to find also on social media. My Instagram is Dayna Lynne North. So please drop me a line anywhere on Twitter somewhere and tell me. I want to hear from you directly, but I would love it if you let me know what you think for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely will. And of course, I'll put a link to that masterclass in the show notes for this episode so people can find it as well. Because I haven't checked it out yet, but just based off of this podcast alone, I'm sure it's going to be excellent.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that. Yeah, like there's a module that's literally dedicated to like, what do I mean by voice? And then there's one dedicated to like, right. to like overcoming navigating challenges, and all as a writer. And then there's a bonus interview with Jay Ellis for the Insecure fans with my good friend Jay. So yeah, like I tried to kind of touch on things where, and I've been happy to hear that my friends who are like you, who are more established in terms of writing, right? And further along on their writing journey, but they're still getting something out of it. So that makes me feel good to hear too.
Yeah, there's even when you've been doing it for years and everything, there's some stuff where it's like, it's this word that people use and you're like, what exactly does that mean? Like,
yeah.
and voice was, I think like, at least for me, voice clicked a little bit of what it was a couple of years ago, but for so long, like 12 years, I was constantly like, what is voice? What do you mean? And nobody really talked about it. It was just something that people said.
But you're right. It does get tossed around a lot, but like, it doesn't get like the way structure gets so much attention, right?
Yeah.
And has always gotten, but you're right, voice and even theme and kind of that, the more abstract stuff doesn't as much. So thank you. I really appreciate that. It means a lot coming from, again, somebody else who's been in the trenches of writing and, facing off against the blank screen.
The dragon.
I'm glad that, exactly.
Yeah.
Attempting to slay your own creative dragons. I'm very glad to hear.
And it's interesting that, like you said, voice and theme aren't talked about as much, because that's really what makes a story work, and makes it unique and makes it, like you said it earlier in the podcast, it's, what story hasn't been told at this point, but the execution is what makes it special. And that's, your voice. So it's interesting that like these ones and zeros of structure is talked about so much, but the thing that matters most just is not.
Yeah, it's true. It is interesting. And it may be, I don't know, if I had to postulate, I wonder if it's because for a long time, it used to be such an exclusive club for so many years, writing for television and film, especially. It was all such an exclusive club that I don't know. I don't think people were necessarily like hoarding or hiding the info, but it was almost like there was no reason to have a class about it, because the chances of somebody in Detroit or somebody in Tallahassee being able to do it were different. Right. And so I think, but now it's so much storytelling is so much more accessible, and that person from Detroit or Tallahassee or Kansas City, Missouri can end up doing this, and so I think maybe that's part of why there hasn't been that same focus. I don't know. It's interesting.
No, that actually makes a lot. That's the first answer that has made sense, actually. So I'll take it. One last question I have, just out of curiosity: what tool do you use for writing usually? Do you have one that's your go-to, like a Final Draft or Fade In or something like that?
It is. Yes, it is Final Draft. Like, I'm, what can I say? It's been I don't know if something like cooler and fancier has come along. It certainly hasn't hit those of us who've been working in the television and film studio systems for a while. It's like it's been so embedded in our operating systems, like literally for so long, that they still are very much embedded. So it's just what I'm most comfortable with.
I'm totally with you. Yeah. Like, I'm a Final Draft user. I jumped ship for a little bit because it was cool to jump ship for a minute there for some weird reason. And then I just went right back. It's just the tools that it has is so helpful, especially when doing like the marathon of, writing a feature, especially at new Beatboard. Yeah. Well, it's not that new, but it's relatively new. Right. And I adore that thing. I use it constantly.
Wait, which feature? The new, I didn't hear you. Which one?
The Beatboard.
Oh, yes, exactly. I know. And I think that is a very smart thing that they added. And I will do Beatboards in different, ways in different places and all that. But I think it was really smart of them to add that. So I agree. Yeah. And I'm curious, when you jump ship, what did you jump to?
I tried literally everything that I could, find. I tried Fade In, I tried Highland 2, Slugline, and Slugline just came out with a new one, and they're all really great. And I love them. And I've used them in different, because writing short films is very different from features to me. And we write our show Film Riot as well. So, I'll sometimes I would use some of the other ones, and some of my guys who do write on, our show Film Riot, which is a web show. So it's 15 minutes or less. They're very short episodes. Okay. So they'll use, Fade In often or something like that. But it's just, once I was, really developing out features and stuff, it's just, it was getting in my way to not use Final Draft, which that's unacceptable. It should not get in my way to do the thing,
No, it should not. It should not. That totally makes sense.
Yeah, that made me run right back into Final Draft's loving arms.
Yeah. Yeah, right now I feel like Final Draft it's like it's the one, I won't even use the analogy that just came to mind, but it is. Like, so far, no one has been able to collectively draw us creatives away, but I'll be curious to see if somebody new shows up on the block, some new program that is able to really beat them. But they are definitely the dominant force, and they've earned it for now. Now. Yeah.
And, hopefully another one rises up to get a little more recognition, because that's just great. Competition is great. It breeds, more inventions. So, hopefully, but so far I'm 100% with you. Final Draft is my baby.
It's the way to go. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. This was fantastic. Can't wait to get it out there for people. And again, we're going to put links to everything that we talked about there with the masterclass in the notes as well. And we'll post it out so people can find it. And I'm definitely going to be checking it out as well.
I'm so glad to hear that. And I really appreciate it. It was super fun to talk to you, and thank you for your great and insightful questions. And I'm so glad we got a chance to do this.
So that's it for today. A huge thank you to Dayna for taking the time to chat with us. And of course, you can find out more about her and about that masterclass she has on Teachable by going to filmriot.com/podcast. Find the episode page for this episode, and we'll have all of that in there for you. I've already started watching it, as I said I was going to at the end of our call. So before I recorded this, I went and I bought it and I started watching it. And so far, I really love it. And I'm not mad that I did that. So definitely jump over and check that out. Of course, you can find me online at twitter.com/Ryan_Conley. If you dug this episode, jump over to iTunes, subscribe, leave a review. That stuff helps us out. And until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.